UFC Fight Night, Nicolau versus Perez, full card predictions. Starting at the bottom of the card, making my way to the top as always. First fight of the night we have is Mahashate versus Gabriel Benitez. I like Mahashate here. The problem with Gabriel Benitez, one, he's a little bit older, 35, close to 36. Mahashate a lot younger. I know Mahashate's coming off of two losses in a row to Rafa Garcia and Vyacheslav Borshev, Slava Claus. But at the end of the day, those two are solid fighters. Slava's a great striker, and Mahashate is a striker in his own right. So it was a tough matchup going up against a really elite, striker. And against Gabriel Benitez, I didn't like the. I know Jim Miller. Jim Miller is a great fighter, but I just didn't like the look there for him. I just don't think he looked great in that fight. Before that, he beat Charlie Ontiveros, who isn't UFC caliber whatsoever. Lost to David Onama and Billy Q. I know, like I said, I know Machate lost two in a row, but he knocked out Steve Garcia badly. The Steve Garcia knockout was just nasty, man. And I think he could probably do something similar to Gabriel Benitez. I think Machate is live for a knockout here. He's also training at a Fight Ready, which is very good for him. Getting work in with those guys, learning from one of the best gyms in the game. So I like that for Machate. 11 years younger. I think has a lot of room to improve. Benitez is more of a finished product. Yeah, I like Machate a lot in this fight. I think he probably finds the win by knockout. Moving right along, Ivana Petrovic versus Na Liang. I don't know why this is even a fight on a UFC card, but I'm going with Ivana Petrovic to beat Na Liang. Na Liang's a one-round fighter, as shown in all of her UFC fights. She usually does pretty well in round one, and even if you look at her overall record, I mean, 19-7. She's had one fight that's went the distance. All of her fights are pretty much first or second round finishes, either for or against her. Like if you look through all of her fights, right? All of her wins are in round one, and if she gets out of round one, she's not going to win. She's shown it time and time again. Now, in the case of Ivana Petrovic, do I think she's very good? No. I think she's not good whatsoever. But the only thing is, I do think she is better than someone like Na Liang, who is, like I mentioned, a one-round fighter. Got finished by Ariane Carnelossi, got finished by Silvana Gomez Juarez, and got finished by JJ Aldrich. Getting finished by those three opponents in a row, not a good look whatsoever. Ivana Petrovic, maybe she faces some resistance. Maybe Na Liang does get her down in round one and has her in some danger. But outside of that, I mean, if she survives like 5 minutes, I think Ivana Petrovic probably finishes her in round two or three. I'm going with Ivana Petrovic. Should be an easy fight outside of the start of the fight for her. James Alantop versus Chris Padilla. Short notice fight. James was scheduled to fight Lando Venata. Well, it was Lando Venata and then Gabe Green. They both had to pull out of the fight. So now, and by the way, Machate was also supposed to fight Angel Jubilee, and they gave him Gabriel Benitez. So I don't like the short notice for Padilla here. I think James Alantop gets the win. This is another fight that's not really UFC caliber, my opinion. Honestly, both of these guys could be like LFA, like regional level fighters. No disrespect to them, but like Chris Padilla coming into the UFC, short notice off beating Justin James. Um, it just I watched his game. I watched his fights. Where was it? The LJ Porty fight. Like, what do you want me to take away from that? It's a 7-5 opponent. Like I know he won his last three fights in a row, but James Lantop's a guy that will pressure forward, look to put the volume on you. Just he's the type of guy that will just the forward pressure, throw heavy, and try to get you out of there, try to break you as the fight goes on. I think he probably does that to Chris here. It would be pretty bad if he couldn't beat a short notice Chris Padilla. Um, I think the UFC is trying to set up Lantop here to get a win. Even in his fight against Gabe Green, I think the Lando Venata fight was actually tougher, um, much tougher than obviously much tougher than Chris Padilla. But I do think James on top gets this one done. Last fight was against Malik Lewis. I don't think he looked great. I mean, he did what he had to do to win the fight, but don't think he looked great in that fight. The fight before against Nelson Oliveira, won that fight. Solid finish there, but um, kind of showed as to why, like, as the rounds go on, he can break opponents, which is kind of what I'm predicting here. But just in a fight, minus 450, just no interest in it as far as a betting perspective. Um, Ketlin Souza, Marnik, I'm not even going to go into this fight. It's not worth my time. It's not worth your time listening to it. I'm picking Ketlin Souza. Marnik Man's not UFC caliber. This whole card is just, I don't know, it's bad. It really is bad. I mean, I'm not someone that likes to complain about a bunch of UFC cards. Most cards I like, even a lot of the Apex fight nights I like. This is one there's very few fights on this card that I actually want to break down. Just like the first four fights in the night, I mean, Machate, Gabriel Benitez should be interesting, but like these three right here, I mean, come on, UFC, you can do better than that. You can do a lot better than that. Speaking of great fights, Dontel Mays is back to fight Caio Machado. I know everyone's looking forward to this one. Dontel Mays. Um, man, I'm picking Caio Machado. Dontel Mays is awful. He's an awful, awful fighter. I hate to say it, but he just is. He lost to Rodrigo Nascimento, beat Andre Arlovsky. Arlovsky's like 50 now, so take that for with a grain of salt. Augusto Sakai. I mean, losing to Augusto Sakai, not a good look. Augusto Sakai, kind of an out of shape heavyweight, if I'm being honest. I know he's got, I don't rate him very highly. Hamdi Abdulwahab, I know he tested positive, which is why it's a no contest, but he lost that fight originally. It's a 3-0 opponent. I mean, Hamdi, regardless of his wrestling credentials, you're fighting a 3-0 opponent, and the fact that he was able to defeat you shows Dontel May is not on that level. He beat Josh Parisian. The Josh Parisian fight was the one where he just humped him, like just humped his face. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I'm like, this guy. And then you look further back into his fights. I mean, he's 10-6. He has no really good wins on his entire career. Has no good wins, right? Arlovsky's his best win, and how I actually want to see 44-year-old Arlovsky is his best win of his career. Parisian, that's not a good win. Roque Martinez, not UFC level, just terrible. And then you just look through. I mean, he beat Muhammad Usman way back in the day. I don't rate Muhammad Usman very highly. I've said that before. Harry Hunsucker, come on. Dontel Mate. And then at least Kyle Machado. He hasn't been fighting like great level of competition either. Uh, his last fight was against Mick Parkin. Mick Parkin did implement a lot of wrestling to get him down and control him there. I think Mick Parkin had like 7 or 8 minutes of control time in the fight against Machado. But do I think Dontel Mays will do that? Probably not. His fight IQ, I don't think is the greatest. If he does wrestle here, if Dontel Mays wrestles, maybe he can win this fight. But do you really trust him to do that? Do you trust Dontel Mays, like especially with your money? I don't. I wouldn't bet on Dontel Mays. I wouldn't bet on Machado either. I'm gonna pick Machado just for the sake of the pick, but another fight that I'm not really super interested in as far as I don't think either guy's gonna make huge jumps in the division. This is a little bit better of a fight, at least. Austin Hubbard taking on Mikhail Figlak. I actually like Mikhail Figlak's game. I know his grappling is questionable. I know the Fressiam fight wasn't a good look for him as far as the grappling department. Really, the overall fight itself, he lost pretty clearly to Fressiam. That was a year and a half ago. He's taken a lot of time off since then. He's 27 years old, so still a really young fighter at 155. Austin Hubbard, really didn't like his performance against Kurt Holobaugh. I didn't like how he looked on the feet against Kurt Holobaugh, a guy who's really known more so for his grappling anyway. I didn't like how he looked there. I think Mikhail Figlak, one thing Mikhail Figlak does do well, Figlak is very good, kind of a combination puncher. He throws well in combos, and that's something I've noticed that he does very well. Um, in Cage Warriors mainly from some of the fights I've seen of him. And I think that's really all it takes to beat Austin Hubbard. Austin Hubbard probably will look to wrestle Figlak just based off of watching his last fight against Fressiam. I don't think he's going to have too much success doing that though. I think Hubbard will probably look to wrestle, and if he can't, get the takedowns or get the control time, I think Figlak will start to piece him up in round two. I could see Mikhail Figlak winning this fight inside the distance, possibly. I just think he's the better striker than Austin Hubbard. I think he's probably the better overall fighter. You look through Austin Hubbard's last few, he was on the Ultimate Fighter. As I said, he lost to Kurt Hallball in the finale. Beat Roosevelt Roberts by split. That Roosevelt Roberts fight was a sparring match, if we're being honest. They were just, it wasn't I when I was watching that fight, I was like, these guys aren't fighting. These guys aren't fighting. They're sparring, and that's why I'm like, I can't really hold that win in high regard because it wasn't really a fight. It was just those two guys kind of, like I said, kind of trying to have a sparring match because they were teammates. He lost to Vince Pichel in his. This is his second time in the UFC. First time in the UFC, lost to Joe Selecki, Vince Pichel, who was like 38 at the time. Mark Madsen took him down like 10 times. Lost to Davey Ramos, who also took him down and controlled him. His wins in between have not been against great competition, if we're being honest. Dakota Bush, Max Roscoff. That was the one where Max quit in the corner. And then, yeah, so overall, the guy, he's got some wins on the regional scene. He's gotten some wins to get him back into the UFC, but I just don't think he's like I really don't think he's that good. A lot of his fights in the UFC, he hasn't really been fighting like the top level competition anyway, and he's been losing to a lot of guys. I think Faresiam is actually quite good. I know he's not a really great, he's not known for his grappling or anything, but I still think Faresiam is a level ahead of Hubbard, and Figlak losing to him there's no real shame there. So I think Mikhail Figlak goes in, beats Austin Hubbard. Um, maybe inside the distance. I think that's a possibility. If not, though, I think he outpoints him to a decision. Headliner of the prelims. I know I'm going through this card very quickly compared to what I usually do. For good reason, though. I don't want to spend too much time on a lot of these fights. This one, Yaya and Victor Henry. I got to go Victor Henry here. I know the line's a little bit wide in my opinion. Ronnie Yaya does have, I think he is the better grappler of the two, if we're being honest. Yaya is a good grappler, but I just can't get to him as far as like he's 40 years old or about to be, right? So 39 years old. Victor Henry's getting up there himself. He's about to be 37. So both guys are on the older end of bantamweight. I just feel like Ronnie Yaya is just, you could see the visible decline in Yaya's game. First of all, he was never known for his striking. His striking is very poor. He really all he is he's a very heavy like pushing the grappling. That's what he needs to get going. If he doesn't have grappling success, he doesn't win fights, right? Um, so I don't think he wins here against Victor Henry. I mean, maybe he can take down Victor Henry once, but Victor Henry is the type of guy that he has good output on the feet. I think his boxing is good. I think his overall striking game is actually pretty good. I think it's way better, 10 times better than Yaya's. Sure, is Yaya's jiu-jitsu and grappling better than Victor Henry? Absolutely. But I think Victor Henry is solid wrestling. I think he knows what the danger is in this fight, right? The clear danger in Rani Yaya is you don't want to give up your back to him. You don't want to if you don't want him to take you down, because if he takes you down and he gets on top, or if he takes your back, he is dangerous. He has 20, almost all of his wins. He has 28 wins, and 21 of them are by submission. He has a lot of submission wins on his record, but that's really how he wins all of his fights, right? He wins all of his fights using his grappling, and even in the fights where he wins not by submission, even the fights where he's won by decision, right? He has 0 knockouts on his entire record, 3 knockout losses, 0 knockout wins. Of his 7 decision wins in the UFC, or not in the UFC, just in general, pretty much all of those come from him out-grappling his opponents but not being able to submit them and just winning a decision. So Yaya, very one-dimensional. I don't think one-dimensional grapplers work in today's game. Now, sure, we have seen some grapplers um, win fights in the UFC and even go really far, but when you're as one-dimensional as Ronnie, I just he is very good. Like I said, very, very good grappler. I just think Victor Henry is just much more well-rounded, and I think he's got more to give at this point in his career. So Victor Henry, I think I think he can finish this fight as well. He should be able to knock out Ronnie Yaya, an older, slowed down version of Ronnie Yaya. He should be able to find the finish. Opening up the main card, we have Tim Means versus Uros Medic. Um, I The line's a little bit wide. I'll say that right away. I think the line's wide. I don't think Uros should be minus 300. I am going to pick him to win. However, 3-1 favorite for Uros Medic, a guy who doesn't have amazing grappling. Now, will he be able to submit Tim Means? I'm not saying it's impossible. I know Uros Medic isn't a grappler, but it's not impossible to submit Tim Means. Tim Means, in the fights I've seen him, like when he gets caught in a submission, he taps right away. And it's just something I've noticed. Not saying like it's just something I've seen against Kevin Holland, against Alex Morono. Those two fights right there. He wasn't really trying to fight the submission. He kind of just tapped right away almost. It seemed so. If your Uros Medic does get him in any type of submission, will he finish the fight? I think it's definitely a possibility. I think on the feet, Tim Means probably is live early. Um, And the reason I say that is because Tim Means, I think this will be a case of Tim Means looking good until he doesn't. I think Tim Means will probably look good early. I think he'll probably, land some shots, and I think it'll be a competitive fight, maybe the first round, and then gets him in the second round, and Uros catches him and maybe wobbles him. Tim Means shoots a bad takedown. Maybe Uros snatches the neck or starts ground and pounding away. I could see Uros Medic doing that and winning here. I think his power, I think the speed advantage is on the Medic side. I think the durability advantage is also on the Medic side. The age, 40 years old to 31. A lot of advantages going here for Uros Medic. The only advantage I can give for Tim Means here, um, he's fought the much better competition, right? Over the course of his, now, I'm not saying Uros hasn't fought, he's fought some solid competition, but over the course of his career, Tim Means has fought a lot of really good opponents. But I just think he's so late in his career, 40 years old. The durability, a bit of a question mark at this point. Uros Medic, a guy that can crack hard. Now they're both southpaws, so it should be interesting to see from that the striking from that perspective. But like I said, I do think Uros gets this one done over Tim Means. Means will look good. My prediction of the fight is Means will probably start the fight. He'll look good, for as long as it lasts, and then Uros will catch him with something. Uros will start to land shots. Tim Means doesn't like it. Maybe he wants to wrestle and then sticks his neck in a bad position, or maybe he gets caught with a good shot by Uros Medic, gets wobbled, and Uros Medic jumps on him and finishes him. So I'm gonna take Uros Medic here. As I said, the line is wide just for the fact of Tim Means been fighting really good competition throughout his career. Much more UFC experience, clearly, than Uros Medic, but I think Uros Medic, the age, the speed, the explosiveness should benefit him. JSP Jonathan Pierce versus David Onama is the next fight. I'm going to go with Jonathan Pierce here. I'm going to go with Jonathan Pierce. I just think the wrestling is too wide, honestly. I think the gap in the wrestling is too wide. Jonathan Pierce, he was dominating the Brito fight, by the way. I actually picked Brito in that fight, and I was thinking to myself, Brito's just getting dominated. He was getting dominated by Jonathan Pierce until he latched up the ninja choke, obviously. Um, and could something like that happen with Onama? Sure. I mean, it's not impossible that Onama catches Pierce in something, but I think Brito is probably a better grappler than Onama is, and I also think Brito is probably stronger than Onama physically. So if Pierce is able to just dominate uh, the Joe Anderson Brito fight like he was, I think he could probably do something similar to David Onama. Now, if you look at David Onama's run in the UFC, he has 5 fights in the UFC. The Gabriel Santos fight, he obviously knocked him out there. That was his last fight, so good win there. The Nate Landwehr fight, hell of a scrap. Hell of a scrap. Nearly had Nate Landwehr out of there, couldn't finish him, and then Nate Landwehr came all the way back. That was a fantastic fight. Honestly, one of the best fights you'll probably ever see, to be honest. Just the fact of, you know, uh, Nate almost losing the fight and then just coming all the way back, and just an extremely good fight to watch if you haven't seen it. Beat Garrett Armfield. That was a short notice first fight in the UFC for Armfield. Gabriel Benitez, as I mentioned, not really super high on him even 2 years ago. And then Mason Jones. Now, the Mason Jones fight is the one I want to discuss for the Jonathan Pierce fight that's coming up. David Onama got taken down 8 times. He got taken down 8 times by Mason Jones, and Mason Jones had 9 minutes of control time against David Onama, right? I don't see how Jonathan Pierce can't do something very similar. I just don't. Jonathan Pierce training at a fight ready, another guy at a fight ready. So you know his game plan. Everyone knows his game plan is going to be heavy wrestling, but it's tough to stop. It's tough to stop a guy who's going to push that pace for 3 rounds. Even if he gets tired, he's still going to push the pace, unless he gets submitted or unless he gets knocked out on the way in. I think Jonathan Pierce probably wins this fight. I think he's got clear wrestling upside. David Onama, the Mason Jones fight, I know it was 2.5 years ago, but like, how much can your wrestling seriously improve in 2.5 years versus a guy that is going to heavily wrestle over and over? And also the cardio. I don't think Onama has terrible cardio, but we have seen him slow down before. We have seen him get really, really gassed out, really tired. Nate Landwehr almost finished him late in the fight. So yeah, I'm going with Jonathan Pierce to out wrestle David Onama. A few fights left on the main card. Jonata Denise versus Austin Lane. Lane versus Denise. I'm going with Denise. Austin, and the reason I'm going with Denise, it's quite simple. I won't. There's really, you look through Denise's fights, right? Now he was a glory kickboxer way back in the day, and he's 6-0 as a professional MMA fighter. Hasn't really fought the greatest level of competition, if I'm being honest. But if you look at Austin Lane, 12-4 on paper, you look and you're like, maybe Austin Lane's got a shot. And sure, if he can wrestle here, if he can get Denise to the mat, he probably does have a shot. But check this out. This dude, Austin Lane, got finished in a minute by Greg Hardy. Greg Hardy, a guy that had 0 fights. He was 0-0, Greg Hardy. And then he finished him in under a minute. Then he comes back against Frank Tate. Frank Tate, a guy who's 7-7, and he gets knocked out in 2.5 minutes into round 1. And on top of that, you think it can't get worse, right? Oh, it can. He loses to Vernon Lewis. He gets beat by Vernon Lewis in the first round. Then he goes in and fights Justin Tafa. Then there was there's an eye poke there in the first 30 seconds. They run that fight back, and it's a minute win for Justin Tafa, knocks him out. So this guy's chin is gone. I think he has 0 chin. I think Denise cracks his chin in the first minute, definitely the first round. If you're a glory kickboxer, you're someone that's fought a lot of the best kickboxers and fighters in that space, you should absolutely be able to knock out Austin Lane. The dude got knocked out by Greg Hardy, like, what else do you want me to say? It's a glory kickboxer versus a guy that got knocked out by Greg Hardy and Frank Tate. Not much else to say. Denise wins in round 1. Featured fight of the night, Karine Silva versus Ariane Lipski. Silva and Lipski. You know what? Uh, tough one to pick. Very tough one to pick because if you look at Silva's record, I mean, she's on a win streak. She's on quite a good win streak as far as winning a few fights in the UFC. But the level of competition is just awful. Marina Moroz, Ketlin Souza, who I didn't even talk about earlier because of how bad that fight was, Polyana Botelho, and Quili. I don't even know how to pronounce her name. Terrible fighters. Bad, bad, bad opponents. Ariane Lipski, on the other hand, she's at least fighting decent opponents. Casey O'Neill, Melissa Gatto, JJ Aldrich, lost to Priscilla Cachoeira. Not a good look, but still. And then Mandy Bohm. So overall level of competition, clearly better for Ariane Lipski. Karini Silva also has not been tested late. Um, she's only had one fight that's been the distance. So sure, you could say she is a finisher, but she's not tested late. Ariane Lipski, I feel like, is probably going to be better if the fight does go past round one. If it does get rounds 2 and 3, how's Karini Silva going to look in those rounds against someone like Lipski, who won a decision against both JJ Aldrich and Melissa Gatto? I don't know. I'm going with Lipski. I think this fight's probably should be a pick 'em. Could Karini Silva submit her? Yeah. I mean, Ariane Lipski, if you look back, she had a bad Matana De La Rosa ground and pounded her in 2021. That's bad. And then Antonina Shevchenko, that is really, really, really bad. Antonina Shevchenko, you should not be losing. Especially, you shouldn't be getting ground and pounded by Antonina Shevchenko. Should never happen. But then if you look on the other side, you look at Karini Silva. She's not exempt to that either. Dion Barbosa, she got knee-barred in a minute by Marina Maktakina, and then she got arm-barred way back in the day by Marina Moroz. So I know she got that one back. She beat Marina Moroz in the rematch, but so if you want to look at the old fights of Lipski, you got to look at the old fights of Silva. Uh, I think this is more of a 50-50. In a 50-50 fight, I'll take the underdog. So I'll take Ariane Lipski. Co-main event is Ryan Spann and Bogdan Guskov. Um, well, I picked Zach Palga to beat Bogdan Guskov, so I'm definitely going to take Ryan Spann to beat him. I'm taking Ryan Spann to beat Bogdan Guskov. I just don't, look, coming into the UFC, I thought Guskov could be something. Um, he did lose. It was a tough first fight in the UFC, right? Tough first fight. You're fighting Volkan Ozdemir. It's a tough opponent, but Guskov, he's another one of those guys, man. He's round one or bust. He's round one or bust. Zach Palga finished him in round one. And then you look at all of his fights. He hasn't been past round one since 2019. And before, like, almost all of his wins are in round one. He has like 2 wins outside of round one. So you're giving me a round one, a one round fighter in Bogdan Guskov who doesn't grapple, right? He's not a good grappler. Spann is a much better grappler. Um, Probably the better minute winner. Sure, Guskov has the power to knock him out, but Spann also has the power to knock Guskov out. So I got to go with Ryan Spann here. It's hard to trust him. It's very, very hard to trust Ryan Spann, but I don't know how. I can't wrap my head around like getting to Guskov, because if you're picking him by round one knockout, that's probably his win condition. But if you look at the side of Ryan Spann, he's also fought the much better guys. He's been fighting, 7-4 in the UFC, much more UFC experience. Bogdan Guskov's, he's had 2 fights in the UFC, lost to Volkan Ozdemir, beat Zach Palga. Now you're fighting Ryan Spann, which is obviously a much bigger step up from Zach Palga. And Ryan Spann, yeah, he lost a split to Anthony Smith, which is not a good look in hindsight. But Nikita Krylov, good grappler, good fighter overall. He beat Dominic Reyes, Ian Kutalava, both in round one. Um, Obviously, he fought twice against Anthony Smith, got submitted the first time, lost a split decision the second time. Beat Misha Serkinov in round one, lost to Johnny Walker, beat Sam Alvey, Devin Clark. If you look through the record, he's got some bad losses on his record. I get it. Could Bogdan Guskov catch him early and finish him? It's not impossible, but I can't bank on Guskov just catching him in round one immediately and finishing him. You know what I mean? So I got to go with Ryan Spann, more UFC experience, fought the overall better guys. I'll take Ryan Spann to get it done. Also, I think he has a better grappling. So, main event of the evening. I know I've been going through these picks pretty fast compared to usual, but it is what it is. Matheus Nicolau and Alex Perez. Uh, um, I'm gonna go with Alex Perez. I think this fight's another one where it's 50-50. I don't think similar to well, not similar styles, but similar in terms of the Silva and Lipsky fight where I thought it was kind of 50-50 on who would win. I think this is another one where it's a little bit closer to 50-50 than it is to minus 200 or minus 180. Nicolau's good. Look, I get it. Nicolau's a very good fighter. He's got good striking, good grappling. He's good. He's very well rounded. But so is Perez. I know he's on a 3-fight losing streak, but this is the problem. You can't just topology cap it. You actually have to look into how those fights went, right? Muhammad Makayev, super close fight. The Muhammad Makayev fight was very, very, very close. And I know both guys didn't look amazing in that fight, but that was all after 3 years off, or a year and 8 months off, whatever the case was. Perez took a long time off in between the Makayev fight and the Alexander Pantoja fight. And after that long layoff, he came back and he looked pretty good. Or he didn't look like neither guy looked great, but what I mean is like he looked better than everyone thought he would, right? Everyone thought, let's be honest, including me, everyone was like, "Oh, Makayev's gonna run through him. Perez is done. He's washed. He's taking this fight for a paycheck." I thought he was taking the fight for a paycheck. He came in there and gave Makayev a tough fight. He gave Makayev a tough fight, lost the fight, but like I said, super competitive against I think Makayev's one of the elite flyweights. And you could say the same about Nicolau, but if you look through his other two losses as of recent, Alexander Pantoja and Davison Figueiredo, both round one submissions, but Davison Figueiredo and Alexander Pantoja are both champions. Alexander Pantoja is the current champion. We'll see if he's current champion after next week, but that's another debate. And then Davison Figueiredo, 3.5 years ago. I mean, Davison Figueiredo, that was 3.5 years ago. Davison Figueiredo was a champion in his prime. So losing to two champions and then Muhammad Makayev, who could be a future champion, now you're fighting Matheus Nicolau, who is a good fighter. Matheus Nicolau is a very good fighter. His chin is a bit of a concern. He's been knocked out 3 times. Brandon Royval knocked him out most recently in 2 minutes. And then before that, he was on a pretty good win streak. Matt Snell, David Dvorak, Tim Elliott, Manel Cap. But if you look at some of those fights, Matheus Nicolau, he's fighting very close with a lot of these fights. He's a guy that likes to skirt around the outside. Oh, move around, move around, move around, move around, and then, kind of pick his shots and then jump in and, fire off some punches, and then get back at range, move around the outside, wait for, Perez to maybe overextend and then try to catch him on a counter. That's the game that Nicolau has. I don't like that. I don't think he has that killer instinct. I think Perez is going to walk forward. I think that the fight is going to play out very close. If the fight hits the mat, I would favor Nicolau, but on the feet, I think it's very competitive. I don't see how, unless Nicolau knocks him out, if it goes a distance, I think the fight's going to be like, it could be a split decision. And if you're giving me a split decision, I'm taking the underdog every single time. I think if you're breaking down a fight and you think it has a possibility where the judges can kind of give it to either guy, I feel like you can't pick a minus 180 in that case. You kind of have to go with the underdog in a fight that's going to be super close, which is what I think will happen. So I'm going to take Alex Perez. I know he's off of a few losses in a row. Where's the motivation at? There's a bunch of outside factors that you can question, but pure, just based off of how they fight, Nicolau, a guy that likes to skirt around the outside, always on the back foot. And then a guy like Perez who will be pressuring on the front foot, looking to, cause damage. Probably will fire off a lot of low kicks. I think Perez can have some success. I think the fight will be really competitive. I personally think it will go all 5. And I think it'll be one of those fights where people are discussing oh, this guy won. No, that guy won. I think it'll be one of those type of fights. So in that type of fight, I will take Alex Perez as the underdog. And there it is, UFC Fight Night, Nicolau versus Perez. I know this was a quicker video than a lot of the ones I usually do. But if we're being honest, the card is not very good whatsoever. Not a lot of fights that I was super interested in breaking down. Some of the main card fights, obviously, main event's solid. Well, for main event purposes, maybe it's not the greatest main event, but Nicolau Perez is a decent fight. Um, Jonathan Pierce, David Onama, solid. Tim Means, Arismetic. So there's some decent fights on the card, but as far as overall product, I mean, Ketlin Souza, Marnik Mann, Lon Top and Chris Padilla, Ivana Petrovic and Na Liang. It's like not great, not great at all. Austin Lane on the main card. Whew, wow. Either way, thank you guys very much for watching. Next weekend is UFC 301. That will be a longer video, more in-depth breakdowns. Either way, thank you guys for watching. And as always, I will see you in the next one.